topic today is how minority communities experience hate in rural California and where they can get support. California's population, the largest of any state, has a majority of minorities, including the country's biggest immigrant population. For all its multiculturalism, in some parts of predominantly white rural California, ethnic minorities experience racism as an everyday fact of life and report feeling too isolated from and distrustful of local government to report it. In other rural regions which have an ethnic majority population, some groups feel invisible or ignored as minorities of minorities. In May 2023, the state launched an anti-hate hotline and resource network, California versus Hate, to address a sharp rise in reported hate crimes targeting racial and ethnic minority populations, which state data show have nearly doubled since 2019. Now, after almost 2 years into the state's pioneering initiative, how are ethnic minorities in rural communities faring? And how can the state's programs addressing hate bring greater support in these regions? Are there lessons learned for minority groups in other parts of rural America? Speakers will share perspectives from the California Civil Rights Department, activists, and community leaders on how different ethnic minorities may experience hate in these rural areas and how the state's anti-hate initiatives can offer direct support to vulnerable populations. Speakers include Kevin Kish, Director of the California Civil Rights Department, the largest civil rights agency in the United States. Kim Stoll, Director of Communications for the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians, who is stepping in for Commissioner Regina Cuellar, who had a family emergency this morning. Gaunu Vang, Communications and Narrative Manager at Hmong Innovating Politics, which is based in Sacramento, and Marlene Thomas, Executive Director of the Imperial Valley Social Justice Committee. We also have short testimonials on video with farm workers in an unincorporated region of the Central Valley about the impact of anti-immigrant hate and fears of deportation raids. We ask speakers to speak slowly, as I am doing, for our interpreters in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean. And reporters, please enter questions in the chat. We will send a video of today's briefing with expanded bios for each speaker and contact information for how you can reach them in follow-up efforts. Our speakers are encouraged to answer questions in the chat throughout the conference. Each speaker will present for roughly 6 to 8 minutes, followed by Q&A, which I will moderate. We open with Kevin Kish, who will discuss the California versus Hate initiative, the data its hotline collects, and its role as a model for addressing hate crimes in other states. Mr. Kish.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Kish. I'm Director of the California Civil Rights Department. I'm very excited to be here today to share a little bit about our work and California versus hate in particular. As I get started, I'd like to thank Ethnic Media Services, Sandy, Julian, all the participants who are joining us today, and a special thank you to the interpreters whose work is crucial in getting our information out to communities across the state. We're very honored to do the work that we do, the anti-hate and the anti-discrimination work, alongside partners from all across California who are committed to standing up to hate and fighting discrimination wherever it occurs. So, what is California versus hate? For the first time in California history, we have a statewide hotline to help individuals and communities targeted for hate report it and identify options for next steps. So, this is not just a hotline where people tell the government what happened to them. It's a tool to connect people who experience hate with culturally competent resources in the communities where they live that they identify as needing. We directly connect people who call us or who report online with resources if that's what they want. We call it care coordination services. So that means we have staff who get on the phone with people who contact us to help them talk to service providers. We can help them talk to law enforcement if that's something they identify as being helpful. Services include legal services, counseling and mental health resources, financial assistance, and connections to all kinds of community-based organizations that provide various different services to Californians in every county in the state. So why did we create this hotline? Why does it exist? It's a direct response to the alarming increase in documented hate crimes across the country in recent years. So, as Sandy mentioned at the outset, in California, between 2019 and 2023, the number of reported hate crimes nearly doubled. It's also a direct response to grassroots organizers and community groups who have been calling on California to create a resource like this one to respond to hate that is not a law enforcement hotline or resource. So, something we know is that hate crimes are significantly underreported, both at the state and the national level. So, for example, research from the Federal Department of Justice has shown that a majority of hate crimes that happen nationwide are not reported to police. And that was a study that was conducted between 2011 and 2015. Why is that? There are a range of factors. So some communities, as we know, are afraid of reporting to law enforcement for various reasons. Some people have had the experience of reporting and nothing happens, so they don't see the point in reporting. Most people are not lawyers. They don't know if what happened to them is a crime that they should report to law enforcement. For immigrant communities in particular, there may be language barriers and fear related to contacting the government for any reason. People in indigenous communities might be grappling with jurisdictional issues between tribal and local, state, and federal authorities. So, for various reasons, many of our communities remain underrepresented in official data on hate. California versus Hate, the hotline that I'm talking about today, was designed to overcome these barriers specifically. It is designed to help everyone who experiences hate, no matter who they are, no matter where they are in our state, and no matter whether what they experienced was in fact a crime. So we are not law enforcement, but we can help connect you with law enforcement if that's something that you want. You don't have to know when you report to us whether what happened to you was a crime. We have support available in over 200 languages. We will talk to you in the language that you speak. You can report anonymously if that's what you choose to do. You do not have to disclose immigration status. It doesn't matter where you are in California. It doesn't matter if you're on tribal lands or if you belong to a tribal community. What you get out of the hotline is driven by what you want, what you identify as needing. So if people just want to report what happened to them, great, we'll take that report. If you want help connecting with resources where you live, we will facilitate that. We will help you get that. So what have we seen? In the first year of the hotline's existence, we received more than 1,000 reports of hate. And roughly 2 out of 3 of the people who contacted us agreed to follow up for care coordination. That means these are people who asked for help accessing resources and who we helped access resources. In our first year, we were contacted by people from nearly 80% of California's counties. But I will share with you, because of the topic today, all of the counties where we heard from no one are rural counties. So that's counties like Del Norte, Sutter, Mariposa. That lack of reporting out of rural areas of our state is also reflected in the Attorney General's hate crime report. Many of these counties are reporting zero or very few hate crimes. We know that when people are afraid, when they feel isolated, it is unlikely for them to turn to government, at least not without a trusted intermediary, a trusted person or organization who helps them do that. So that's why our local partnerships with community-based organizations are so crucial. It's also why the voices and platforms of the reporters on the call today are so crucial to help us get the word out to people all across the state, and particularly people in rural areas and in isolated communities. Again, I want to emphasize that California versus Hate is not limited to our cities. It's not limited to our coastal areas. It's not limited by politics. It is a program for everyone that is part of our state's work to build a California for all. So we all have civil rights. We all have the right to be free from hate and violence, and we all have the right to access help if it occurs. So if you have been the target of hate or if you witness an act of hate, you can call our hotline, 833-8-NO-HATE. That's 833-866-4283. Our hotline is open Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. You can also leave a message. Or you can report online at any time by visiting californiaversushate.org. That's CAVS hate.org. And you can report in 15 different written languages. If you call, we can talk to you in over 200 languages. We at the Civil Rights Department are very deeply committed to making our state a place where everyone feels safe and where everyone can thrive. And we're very grateful for all of your work in helping make that a reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin Kish. Just a couple of quick questions. First of all, what do you think is the most effective strategy for informing and educating minorities in rural communities about the hotline? And to what extent is this a real call out to our ethnic media partners to help expand visibility of the hotline so that more people perhaps are aware of it?
Well, let me say that when it comes to both California versus hate, but really any service that we provide at the Civil Rights Department or any government service at all, we have an obligation to meet people where they are. So think about how you find out about things in the world. Sometimes it's watching the news. Sometimes it is through a newspaper that you get in print or online. Oftentimes, for a lot of people these days, it's social media. But when we're talking about immigrant communities specifically, when we're talking about non-English speaking communities, nothing replaces that trusted voice that many of you provide in the publications or platforms that you are using to get news to the communities that you are informing. So, in direct answer to your question, Sandy, there is no replacement. That this group is crucial in getting this information out to communities. The other thing that I'll say in response to your question is that people aren't necessarily, spending their day looking for information about what to do if they experience hate, if it hasn't happened to them. And when it does happen to them, you can feel paralyzed, right? You can feel that you don't know where to turn. And so, for that reason, I think it's incredibly important not to do this once, not to report on it once, but to continue to get the word out because people aren't necessarily looking for this information or news until it happens to them. And when it does happen to them, they need to access it where they are.
Thank you. Kevin, there are a number of questions in the chat. In the interest of time, I'm going to move to our next speaker, but I hope you'll address them in the chat, and that way everyone will also be able to see details that we might otherwise miss. So I'm going now to our next speaker, who is Kim Stoll. And Kim is stepping in for California versus Hate Commissioner Regina Cuellar, chairwoman of the Shingle Spring Band or tribe in El Dorado County. El Dorado is just north of Sacramento, and 74% of its population is non-Hispanic white. Less than 2% are Native American. Chairwoman Regina Cuellar was called away this morning on a family emergency, and Ms. Stoll, who has directed communications for the tribe for 12 years, generously agreed to stand in. Although not a tribal member herself, she will share her experiences bridging the racial divides between Native Americans and the predominant white culture. Welcome, Ms. Stoll. And just to start you off, one initial question. Working for 12 years for the tribe to build stronger communications between the Native minority and the predominantly white majority in El Dorado, what have you learned?
So thank you so much for having me today. I came to this area originally to work for the tribe's casino, Red Hawk Casino, and did marketing for them. And then 2.5 years into that, the tribe had asked me if I would be interested in working directly for them. And I'll tell you, at first I was like, whoa, what is that going to be like? Like I was a little unsure. And I have to tell you, this has been such an incredibly great 12 years. Working for the tribe, I have learned so much and so much about what we're talking about today. And it's really an honor to be able to represent them and certainly to represent Chairwoman Cuellar today. When we talk about the communication, so El Dorado County is it's very, very conservative. And I know that the demographics were shared with you. And so what I've really learned, I think, is that mostly it's about education. And the education that we're still teaching our children in school, that that Columbus saved the Indians for Thanksgiving. I mean, these stories that aren't true really made us realize that so much of it is about education. And I think one of the examples of that is that El Dorado County has a deep gold rush, deep history in the gold rush. And many years ago, when I first started working for the tribe, there was going to be a gold panner event. And so we were asked if we would sponsor this event. And we said, you know what, we would be happy to. But what we would like is our opportunity to just have a short conversation up at the podium when everybody else was presenting, so that we could explain the truth about the gold rush, which was devastating to Native Americans. And they said, no, we don't want you to be a sponsor. We don't want that that is just not what we're here to do. But over the years, like I said, that was many years ago. And over the years, I think that there's been a lot more, ability to tell the truth, and a lot more interest in what the truth really is.
So, Commissioner Cuellar referred to Placerville as having the name of Hangtown, referring almost like sundown cities, very dangerous for members of minorities, especially Native Americans, to be in Placerville. What can you tell us about that?
She's right. And I will tell you, a lot of that was a surprise to me. And we had tags made for our cars for parking in the parking lot. And a lot of, I don't know whose idea that was, but a lot of the tribal members said, no, we're not going to do that. You don't understand that if we identify ourselves as tribal members, there'll be a problem. And so it was interesting to see that, they've been here for a long time. And although the name is the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians, this not the they were named that when they were moved here to the reservation with no water, no electricity, no means to make a living. And despite all of that, they have persevered.
Right. Commissioner Cuellar referred to an epidemic of hate incidents and noted the distrust that Kevin Kish referred to, the distrust of authorities and the tendency not to report incidents, and the effort of the commission, California versus Hate Commission, of which she is a member, to hold commission meetings directly with communities like the communities of El Dorado. How do you see the work of the commission and the California versus Hate hotline? What can you tell us about the impact of that?
So I've been fortunate to actually work alongside Chairwoman Cuellar with some of the commission work, and we did have an event at Red Hawk Casino. We had one of those rural community events, and it was very interesting. We got a lot of participation. I think people learned a lot, and I know that they have done many of those in other communities so that they can really hear from the people, the truth of what's going on. And I know that the hotline is something that she was so excited about being implemented because it's working and it's helpful.
That's great. I want to go to a couple of questions before we move on to our next speaker. But I would say, are you optimistic that through initiatives from the state under California versus Hate, there is a kind of encouragement to expand communications? You're in an area with almost no media, what we call media desert. And this makes it hard. For example, when you do have commission meetings or town halls, how do you reach a wider audience? What is the tribe doing to expand its education and communications of the broader community?
So one of the ways that the tribe is doing that is actually they have been reclaiming a lot of their homeland. And most of that is the Sacramento region. Actually, just the other day, the BIA was here, and some land from Verona that you may know as the Verona Marina was put into trust for the tribe, and that's where the tribe was originally, where like there was a census taker, Indian agent, and where they were originally found. They also have bought a building on J Street, 2700 J Street, that's going to be used for community gatherings, cultural gatherings. And then the most recent acquisition is 301 Capitol Mall. And it's a prominent area. And it really, and actually there was a parade recently for Native American Heritage Month. And it was so great to see the tribal members there where their ancestors lived and flourished for years. And I think that those type of things go such a long way to educate not only El Dorado County, but the broader Sacramento area.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kim, for stepping in and for sharing your thoughts. Please stay on the call as we continue to our next speaker, Gaunu Vong, with Hmong Innovating Politics. And Ms. Vong will talk about California's Hmong population and her organization's work to promote Hmong civic engagement. Hmong in California number over 107,000 people and are concentrated in Fresno and Sacramento counties. Ms. Vong, please go ahead.
Hi, folks. I also want to echo Kish's sentiment earlier. Thank you so much, Ethnic Media Services, for having HIP represented in the space today. We acknowledge and deeply appreciate how meaningful and impactful these efforts are for our communities who go unseen by various forms of media. I'd like to begin with a brief story of Hmong people in America. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the first generation of Hmong Americans are refugees from Vietnam, the Vietnam and Secret War in the 60s. There are many items that have been discussed today about the relevance of displacement in our minoritized communities, and the Hmong and Southeast Asian American people are no exception. As Sandy had mentioned earlier, there are a large portion of the Hmong community resides in California, and recent statistics have shown that roughly 300,000 Hmong folks are in the U.S. are also naturalized citizens due to their former refugee statuses or have been born in America. But we do have a smaller demographic of Hmong folks who are green card holders. In the last decade, a rough estimate of 4,500 of these folks have deportation orders against them to be deported back to Laos as a result of being convicted in a crime, whether it be small or large, which can stay in effect on their record for decades, even after they serve their time and have been released. So they are in constant concern of being deported during these times. So this is why it's critical to talk about these issues and have them addressed through the most mainstream ways of communicating information to the public, particularly, as mentioned before, through media and social media. All this to say that one of the increasing worries of the upcoming administration has called on Laos to accept more deportees with a funded reintegration program. There are also similar agreements happening in Cambodia and Vietnam, and this continues to really deeply affect our communities, further perpetrating stigmatization, stereotypes, and extreme xenophobia that we have faced since the beginning of the pandemic and beyond. There are also many other things regarding collective concerns of our community's well-being, from LGBTQ rights to affordable housing to access to reproductive health. There's really just so much, and so it's incredibly important.
Slow, a little bit more slowly.
Okay.
Belle, thank you. It's fascinating, but an interpreter said, please slow down.
Thank you, Sandy. Yes, I'm a naturally fast speaker, so I'm trying to pace myself. So thank you for that ask, Sandy. So I was talking about the collective concerns of our communities and how there's just so many of them. So it's incredibly important to have services created like the California versus Hate hotline that helps spotlight and make mainstream our community's issues. And as I've said, this has been an ongoing issue for the last 2 decades and arguably since the beginning of Hmong American history, but it's only really become mainstream in general media in the past couple of years with the help of resources like California versus Hate. This is both a pro and a con because it can distort the timeline of our community's issues and make them seem small or new when that really is not the case. However, it's very comforting to know that resources like California versus Hate exist, but due to the fact that it simply has not existed long enough, as mentioned earlier, it's been around for 2 years, have built that intimate trust that is critical in our community, where it has resulted in underreporting. The Hmong and Southeast Asian American people are also tightly wound with their community systems, such as the Hmong 18 clan system. So foundational trust is a requirement in order for these to succeed and to minimize underreporting. I'd like to also take the opportunity to implore the sustainability and continued funding of resources like this to build stronger trust and investment in longevity and quality of our community's well-being. Because we, the Hmong and Southeast Asian American community, are generally a young community, it's crucial to build and have that trust and autonomy. And so here at HIP, we strongly center our youth and young adults, recognizing that change is not possible without their leadership, especially during the rise of mainstream anti-Asian hate. It's also directly correlated to the cultural disconnect and social isolation many of us are seeing with our youth and young adults, whether they be community youth young adults or even community organizer youth young adults. And so by recognizing how foundational the well-being of our youth and young adults are, we at HIP have been working in collaboration with other youth-serving orgs, local youth-serving orgs, to cultivate a greater ecosystem of Pan-Asian and BIPOC youth to help them overcome these feelings and very real obstacles within our communities. Here at HIP, we also have a strategy of the 3Bs, meaning belong, believe, become, which we've developed as a strategy to combat hate, develop a sense of agency within our youth and young adults, and ultimately just really shift the narrative of our community's perspective of collective identity in a both multidimensional and intentional way. Especially during this time of turmoil, we truly believe and want to cultivate in our communities the truth that we hold so much power and possibility, and that this is found and reinforced through love and sustainability. I know my time is running short, but again, I just want to say thank you to all the change makers out there, particularly our youth and young adults who are very much pioneering the change for our communities. Thank you all again.
Bill, thank you so much. In Siskiyou County, which is another, like El Dorado, predominantly white county with a very conservative political structure, how are Hmong and other Southeast Asians dealing with prejudice, discrimination, and hate? Could you give us a few examples of where civic engagement is critical to how they're addressing the racial divisions in Siskiyou, and whether you think the rise in anti-Asian hate whether this is helping, the civic engagement is helping people feel they can deal more effectively. You had said the state initiative was a tremendous validation for the need to take on and report on incidents of hate. But what would you say is the atmosphere now in a place like Wairika or Siskiyou for Hmong?
Thank you for that question, Sandy. I know that this briefing is a lot about minoritized communities, particularly in white rural areas, and our work is generally centered in Fresno and Sacramento. And so speaking on Skiu and the Eureka areas where there's heavily underreporting in the Hmong and Southeast Asian American communities in general, there's a lot of underreporting overall, just because, as I mentioned, like there's not enough trust that has been built with our communities. Not to say that California versus Hate is not trustful, it's just that we are not yet educated or well versed enough in it to be utilizing those systems. And so the reporting mostly happens with our traditional systems, as I mentioned, like the Hmong 18 clan system. And so in order to have more reporting, and although it's been very reassuring to have those resources, in order to encourage more reporting through like our civic engagement programs where we're educating our communities and also just uplifting their experiences to not perpetrate the continuous worries of victim blaming in our communities. It's just been very important for us to empower our youth because we see this domino effect. When we educate our youth educates their families, and it trickles on into the community. And so that's why a lot of the work we do has been very centered on our youth and young adults to empower them as leaders in our communities, while also having them be a powerful activist and tool for our communities to be well educated on how to report these hate crimes that are happening in our communities. All that to say, though, to answer your question directly, Sandy, is that the underreporting continues, and we are looking for strategies to civically engage not only our youth, young adults. We also see that our elders also feel disempowered, and how can we better strategize to support our communities that are asking for these additional resources.
I want to just turn to Kevin Kish at the moment to ask whether the data from California versus Hate hotline breaks down or disaggregates to the level of Hmong and or Native American.
Thanks. So our data is not broken down that far. What I can share with you in terms of the breakdown of the data, I'm pulling it up just a moment, is that in that first year when we received more than 1,000 reports, the most commonly cited form or reported form of hate was based on race and ethnicity. So let me get those numbers for folks. And this is consistent with what we see nationwide. It's consistent with what we see in other sources of data here in California. So in our reports through California versus Hate, we looked into very closely 560 of those reports to try to create some validation, meaning, we are verifying that what the person reported is accurate in our system. And so of those reports, race and ethnicity made up 35% of the reports. That's the highest. Of those, anti-Black bias is the most common, followed by anti-Latino and anti-Asian bias. These are the most cited reasons for reports related to race and ethnicity. So anti-Black at nearly 27%, anti-Latino at about 15%, anti-Asian at about 14%. After race and ethnicity, the most common frequently cited basis was sexual orientation and gender identity. Actually, gender identity first, followed by sexual orientation as the most cited bias motivations.
Thank you. This is so helpful in terms of follow-up reporting for all of us. And Belle, thank you so much for sharing this. The optimism you bring to this work is very encouraging for all of us, especially speaking as someone who's working directly with the next generation of Hmong Americans. So I think there are a lot of avenues for us to pursue, and HIP is definitely a key source for us going forward. Let's please stay on the call as we go to our next. It isn't a speaker, it's a video that our colleagues took from Tulare County, going directly to farm workers in an unincorporated town called Poplar. And it happened that it was in the wake of the 3-day immigration raids that occurred in Bakersfield. And I just think it's important to hear from primarily undocumented farm workers what it's like to feel so sort of under siege and fearful of what your future holds, to the point where you're unwilling and unable to risk going out to shop, let alone to work. So, Jessica, could you please play the EMS very short video, which has subtitles in English?
Can you guys see the video?
Yes.
estado viviendo en los últimos días con una ansiedad y sabemos ya que varios de nuestros familiares, amistades han sido detenidos por ICE.
Se siente asustado uno, no puede ir a trabajar, no puede ir a comprar comida, ir a lavar ropa de trabajo. No, desde cuando empezaron la migración, el BQP, de ese tiempo no he ido a trabajar, porque pues si me encuentran, tal vez me agarra y pues eso nomás que estoy asustado.
Y pues también eso es verdad, la gente no sale ni a las tiendas por lo mismo, por el miedo de ese que hay. Y muchos niños no van a la escuela también por lo mismo, porque pues sus papás no pueden, y que joden porque pues esas redadas mentadas según. Oye, igual también soy inmigrante, igual lo mismo. Y pues también aquí andamos trabajando con miedo, lo que es.
Creo que tienen mucho temor, incluso aquí bajó mucho la venta. Hubo días que en realidad no vino la gente a comprar. Pienso que por el temor de que les decían que andaba aquí en esta área, porque aquí estuvo el viernes pasado. Entonces creo que ese fue el temor de ellos, fue saber o pensar que en verdad estaba y que se los podían llevar y dejar a sus hijos solos, a sus familias.
Pero sí nos han dicho los contratistas que los campos están vacíos, muchos de ellos no fueron a trabajar y se está sintiendo en la economía del local. Y si sigue así, creo que se va a sentir aún más allá de lo local. Y pensamos que va a impactar los precios de la comida, porque no va a haber labor aquí que pueda desempeñar eso si sigue con esas redadas. El temor es real y lo estamos viviendo.
So what's important about this video is that we would never have had access to these rural migrant workers without the trusted introduction of Marie Perez Ruiz, who runs the Central Valley Empowerment community. It's important that these grassroots organizations, which are part of the resource network that California versus Hate has mobilized to provide responses to calls and to the experience of incidents of hate, the importance of reaching people who initially would not have confided their experiences to us, although one was a very experienced Mexican photojournalist and the other was fluent in Spanish. But it was really the intervention of the community-based organization in Poplar that formed the bridge. And that is why groups like HIP, groups like the Shingles Band co-chair, the chairwoman of the Shingles Band and her team, and now our last speaker, Marlene Thomas from the Imperial Valley Social Justice Committee, are so pivotal in forming a connection for people otherwise very isolated. So with that, I'd like to introduce Julian Doe, who will conduct the conversation with Marlene Thomas. And her nonprofit in Imperial County is based in the southern tip of the state for our colleagues who are not from California, and where the white majority is not the predominant group, but rather a Latino and multi-ethnic majority. So, Julian, please start the interview with Marlene.
Thank you so much, Sandy. So as Sandy mentioned, we would like now to draw attention to one of the two bordering counties with Mexico, Imperial Valley. So unlike the white majority rural counties to the north, the majority of Imperial counties, 190,000 residents are multi-ethnic, with Latinos at 90%, non-Hispanic whites at 9%, Blacks at 3.2%, and Native Americans and Asians American at just over 2%. It is primarily an agricultural county and one of the state poorest. Many residents are not aware that hate crimes and incidents are considered civil rights violations and should be reported because these things have been so normalized for so long. And trust in authority is also a major issue. And our speakers, Ms. Thomas, is going to share more details that with us. So, Ms. Thomas, thank you for joining us. Please tell us about yourself, why you founded your organizations, and the challenges facing ethnic and racial minorities population in Imperial Valley. Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Julian. Let me first say that hate is everywhere, and it's our rural border community. It's no different than the urban cities. But what makes it stand out more is that here in Imperial County, the population has made a major shift. When I was coming up, it was primarily a white community. And then and it's now 90%, like you said, Hispanic. But the difference in our county is the shift is there's more assimilation of the Hispanic community. And then for the immigrants, they're just trying to survive and they are being discriminated really by their own people. So it's really it's a tough call for us here in Imperial County. Now, as far as the hate goes, we African Americans, we have not been um, bombarded with hate or anything. It's quiet. It's really quiet. But when you come to the trans community in Imperial County, it is it's horrendous. We have a lot of hatred in the schools, the bullying, and even murders. We've had murders down in the valley of the transgender community.
Have we, Marlene,
Ms.
have we lost you?
Marlene?
Okay. Julian, do you want to summarize some of the information Marlene shared with us? Hopefully,
Yes.
we'll get her back.
Yeah, as soon as Marlene is back, we can continue with her informations. But I have been visiting and working in the Imperial Valleys for over many years, and it's appalling, and it's really interesting that despite it being a minority majority populated county, the
Oh, something happened here.
it's very conservative county. Marlene, are you back?
No, well,
Marlene, we can hear you. So if your visual is not up, which is fine. Please
okay.
continue with what you were sharing.
Okay, and that's really it. And really, I'm not really expressing myself the way that I really want to. I'm a little anxious and all, but this is really my first time. I'm more of a worker and a doer and not a person who goes out and makes presentations. But shoot the question to me.
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, I attended a news briefing organized by the LA Human Relations Committee about its latest report, whereas the data for all the hate crime incident just really spiked and so high that it's really alarming. And the newly elected DA, Nathan Hockmans, he said that law enforcement actually play a role in this because despite the knowledge of seeing data of hate crime incidents rising, law enforcement have not really stepped up by holding the perpetrators accountable for all these acts. And I think if I from our conversations and my knowledge of the community, it is very similar to what's going on in Imperial Valley. And I can also cite one incident that I am somewhat familiar with, is that there's been so much of rants and hates spewed in the cyberspace in social media throughout Imperial County. And it's alleged that one of the perpetrators is actually from a law enforcement. And that's really created an atmosphere of fear and also trust that we talked about earlier. So if that is the case, then where can people go for help and to report? Can you elaborate on that, Molly?
Yes, that is very true. I know we had a Stop the Hate conference, and the chief of police and the sheriff that were there and present. They went through the whole reporting process that you have to do. But here you go. They had only 2 complaints, and I feel and I know that they had to have more than that, but they didn't. But why? Why is fear? The why is lack of awareness of what the people can really do. And then, believe it or not, as small as rural communities are, we are not getting information. And we have to increase public awareness to that fact. And we have in our county, we've had our elected official who is a trans, who's elected to the city council. Uh, I mean, I can't even describe to you the type of hate and hatred that was brought against him. And he won 2 elections, but they finally did a recall. But they dehumanized the gentleman. And what did the police do? Nothing.
What city was that in? Was that El Centro or
That was in Calexico.
Calexico?
Mm-hmm.
And
And then, sorry.
your organization, which has the mission of bringing groups together,
Yes.
to what extent do you feel you're able to spread the word about initiatives like the California versus Hate hotline? Or what are the more effective measures to encourage people to stand up to hate?
I actually thought about that last night, and I think that it's very to me is basic. We have to collaborate or come together and get the information not only to the general public but to the schools and to our various institutions. That's one of the first things we have to do. I do work. Our people we work in close uh, relationship with ACLU. We do give workshops on know your rights, what to do when you're stopped by the police and even border patrol. But it's not enough. We have to put together a strategic plan to get the information to the people. And that's the most important thing to me is making the people, our citizens, aware.
Can you share a little bit information about how your group came together? Because my understanding is that it's largely through people who wanted to make a difference, and they volunteering. They're not getting paid for the efforts.
Exactly. And that's one of the unique things of our committee is that everyone is working, they have a job. But we all they're committed, and we have come together initially because of what was going on in Imperial Valley. There was a lot of police harassment and in our county, particularly with the African American community. And we all got together, and here we are. We work diligently. We have over 78 volunteers, and we all don't do the same thing because we have different interests, and we're able to make an impact in our community. And actually, I would say that we do, and we're one of the major organizations in our county.
Great.
And just
I'm gonna no, I'm afraid, Julian, we've run out of time, and Commissioner Kish has to leave. So I want to go to our final question for our speakers before we end the conference. And starting with you, Commissioner Kish, what is the main takeaway looking at rural California, a region that is vast, but often very invisible, especially if you're a minority, 2.3 million residents. And yet we hear very little. And as reporters, it's difficult to reach isolated communities, let alone minorities of minorities, such as Marlene Thomas was speaking. So what is the takeaway for us? And I'll ask each of our speakers that for the importance of the hotline and the importance of this California versus Hate state pioneering initiative.
Well, thank you for that question. I think that it can feel sometimes like things don't change, that hate is not new, right? People's fear is not new. But also sometimes things do change. So while these phenomenons are not new, California versus Hate is new, right? And so it is a resource that has never existed before. And the big takeaway for me from the time that we've been operating it so far is that when people learn about it, they are using it, right? So that 1,000 complaints in the first year. Now, I agree with what Ms. Thomas was saying, that it has to be very strategic in how you get information out to people. And something that I mentioned earlier is people aren't necessarily going to get the information if they aren't looking for it in that precise moment. So it's not a one and done, right? You don't get the information out and then put your work on a shelf. It's a constant conversation and collaboration with community and community members. So the big takeaway for me is the hotline is being used when people know about it, and we have to redouble our efforts to make sure that people know about it when they need to know about it, not just when we have it in our minds to get the information out. And you all are crucial in that effort.
Thank you. That's a great closing statement. Let me ask for a 30-second soundbite from Kim Stoll and from Belle, Ms. Fong, and from Marlene to take us out. Kim, the takeaway for you from today's focus on minority groups in rural
For me,
California.
I think the takeaway is encouragement. And I'm so honored that the chairwoman serves on this commission on the state of hate, because it's really important work. And the hotline is very important. And I think the longer that it's established, the more it will be used. And so my takeaway is being encouraged.
Great. Thank you.
And
Ms.
I need to excuse
Yes,
myself.
that's right. I know we're a minute after. Ms. Vong, can you sign off with your final takeaway?
Yes, definitely. My main takeaway is building on genuine trust and care. That will take us very far, especially with advancing the usage of California versus Hate Hotline.
Great. And Ms. Thomas, for you, the takeaway and the importance of the hotline spreading the word.
Just keep hope alive.
Thank you. And this is a message that we want to also share with the farm worker community in the unincorporated town of Poplar. We also are happy to share the video from Poplar with all of the media on this call. And I want to thank Commissioner Kish particularly, and all our speakers for participating in today's briefing. We're 2 minutes after the hour, so have a good weekend and look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you.